I'm so excited to be here. I do a lot of teaching, but it's mainly for computer programmers. So they make me talk about computer stuff. And today I get to talk about teaching, which is a little more creative for the creative people. And I wore my black shirt, so I'd look a little more creative. And one of the fun things is that we have Andrew Jones in our company, who's the web comic for Happy Accidents. And he did all my slides as cartoons. So that will make me look a little more creative too. What I wanted to talk about was teaching and how teaching makes things that are hidden more obvious. And before that, I thought I would back up and I would talk a little bit about my career and the Big Nerd Ranch, so it'll sort of motivate what my thoughts on all this are. 1992 was a very big year for me. I ran away from graduate school. I was in mathematics grad school. And I saw the NeXT computer for the first time. So it was in the basement of the building, and I sat down and I started learning how to program this thing. And if you know about NeXT, NeXT Computer was the company that Steve Jobs created when he left Apple. We made these cool black computers, and they had fantastic software on them and great tools for developers. And I worked really hard to learn these new tools and these new techniques for being able to program the NeXT computer. And everyone was saying it was doomed. But if you know what happened next, NeXT was bought, the word next is a little overloaded here, NeXT was bought by Apple, and we all ended up as Apple employees. I was there at the point. And it became the basis of OS X, and then it became the basis of iOS. So I, in 1992, started learning to program iOS applications. So a very lucky little incident there in 1992. As I said, I ended up working at NeXT. I was there when the merger happened, and I suddenly became an Apple employee. And my job at NeXT and Apple was to travel around the world teaching people how to use these tools and techniques to write apps for what became Mac OS X. And in about 2001, it became clear that Steve had created a culture that could actually deliver something, and that the technology's sort of foundation that we all needed was there. And I thought, this company is actually going to be successful. And then I looked at the company and I realized there was a little niche they had left alone. That is, Apple was a consumer brand, but they were shipping these very, very complicated technologies. And mostly when this happens, like if Oracle ships a new database, part of their plan for monetizing it is they create a professional services division that then sells training and consulting on that technology. But Apple, being a consumer company, had no interest in this at all. So I went out and created a new company, Big Nerd Ranch, in 2001 to do professional services for Apple technologies, which, if you asked anybody at the time, was a ridiculously stupid idea. The stock was below $10. OS X was just coming out. But I really believed. One of the tricks was to move out of Silicon Valley. So in Silicon Valley, people change jobs about every 18 months. The cost of living is incredibly expensive. And I thought, where could I go? And I moved to Atlanta. And Atlanta has a great supply of talent from Georgia Tech and the other universities. It has an incredible airport, makes it so I can fly anywhere in the world really easily. And it has a nice industrial base here with Coca-Cola and Turner Networks and Home Depot. There's a healthy economy here that we can sell our services into very easily. So Atlanta has been a huge benefit for us. We focused on two businesses, as I said, training. And the training we do two different ways. We fly people out to corporate sites, but the other way we do it is we try to teach it in a retreat-style setting. So the idea with a monastery, right, is that you retreat from the world so that you can really concentrate on things. And that's what we decided to do with the Big Nerd Ranch. And that's actually where the name came from, is that I wanted to create that idea of retreating from the world and I didn't think that the big nerd monastery would go over so well. And I had just seen that movie City Slickers, and I had seen the Dude Ranch, and I was like, for an American, that's sort of the closest thing we have to the idea of a monastic retreat. So I named the company Big Nerd Ranch, and we teach these classes in a retreat-like setting, and we do them here in Atlanta. We also do them near Monterey, California at Asilomar, and we're just a little bit in Europe as well. The other part of our business, and actually most of the money at this point, is our app development business, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as I go forward. We started in 2001 doing just Mac stuff, and then in 2008 the iPhone SDK came out. We had already written the standard book on Mac programming, and all these ideas translated from one to the other. So we suddenly became the go-to people for training and books and consulting on iOS. And suddenly these huge companies came and asked for our help, and we were developing applications for Procter & Gamble and AT&T and General Electric and Coca-Cola, and it was just a really exciting opportunity. And I want to talk about, a lot of you are entrepreneurs, and I think that we sometimes downplay the role of luck in the success of a company. And I really have to point out at this point, this was really lucky. I didn't see this coming in 1992, I didn't see it coming in 2001, but when the iPhone SDK came out, the Big Nerd Ranch was a huge beneficiary of that technology. As we continued developing apps and teaching people, our clients started coming forward and asking for more and more services. So they wanted an Android app. So we learned how to do Android. We wrote a book and a course on Android, and now we have the standard book and course on Android as well. And then we started doing HTML and JavaScript. And then they wanted more services. So we started hiring project managers and designers. Now we're a 120-person company. We're based here in Kirkwood. And it's just been a really great ride. One of the problems that I had to deal with was the E-myth. And the E-myth goes essentially like this. Let's say you're a really great plumber, and you decide you don't want to have a boss anymore, you're going to create your own plumbing company, it's going to be the best plumbing company in the whole world. Two things could happen. One is you could fail, and this is pretty common because you're a plumber, not a businessman. And so if your business fails, you go back to being a plumber and everything's fine. The other thing that could happen is you become very successful. And then you start hiring other people to help you with your plumbing efforts. And then you end up being a manager. So you spend all your days in meetings and looking at spreadsheets, and you don't get to do what you're really good at and really passionate about, which is plumbing. And this is what happened to me, is the company was so successful that the part that I loved, the programming and the teaching and the writing, I didn't get to do anymore. I just didn't have time to do it. And so I was hiring people, and I was really envious of the jobs that I was giving them in this whole process. But I wanted to be a good CEO, and so I joined a CEO book group, and in the book group was this guy, CBQ, and CBQ did some training for us, and he had done consulting, and CBQ and I started worrying about what happens if we die. And so we came up with the Death Pact. Okay, CBQ's mom would have ended up inheriting a stock, and she would suddenly own a company that she didn't understand at all. And my wife would end up owning a company that she didn't understand if I had died. So we were going to get life insurance policies on each other so that we could buy each other's heirs out if one of us died, and then we would merge the company together. And as soon as we came up with this plan, I started fantasizing about faking my own death. And I took that as a sign that we needed to do something differently. So CBQ had a company called HighGroove. And just so you can understand the strength that came out of this, HighGroove did work that was on the cloud. So they did servers, web services that ran on servers in the cloud. And we did all the stuff that was front end. So we wrote the apps that ran on your iPad or your iPhone or your Android device or inside your web browser. And every system that we developed for a client required both parts. So we needed the apps to be able to call back to a server and get information, and the servers had to supply data as well. So suddenly, we had this idea, we'll merge the two companies together. My company was a little bit bigger, so I would end up owning most of the company. And I promoted him to be CEO, and I got to go back to concentrating on the part that I was really passionate about, which was primarily the teaching part of it. So I helped write the books and the courses. I mentored the instructors and helped them become better instructors. And I get to run around and talk because I've been doing this forever. I get to go and talk to computer programmers, but I have never actually publicly gotten up and talked about teaching and my philosophy of teaching. And so I'm really excited to get this opportunity to talk about that. And I'm going to start off with the very best trick for becoming a great teacher. The trick is to choose your students very carefully. There are essentially 3 different teaching situations. The first one is mandatory. So when I taught vector calculus at the University of Washington, it was the last math sequence a lot of people had to take, especially pre-med people. Oh, the pre-med people drove me crazy. This was the last one they had to take, and they knew they were going to never use vector calculus. But because they were a biology major, they were required to take it. And so the most common question that I would get was always, is this going to be on the quiz? And vector calculus is this beautiful thing. And every once in a while you get a student, a precious student, who was so excited about vector calculus. And then you would spend all your time answering the question, is this going to be on the quiz? So the mandatory teaching experience is not really that good for either party. It's not great for the students. It's not great for the instructor. Right now we're seeing a lot of excitement in the entrepreneurial area about companies that can teach large numbers of people. So we're seeing like Coursera, these online courses. And it's really neat. They go out and they invite as many people as possible. The courses are free. But the problem is that there's an incredible attrition rate on these. So 90% of the people who take these online courses never finish them. And so the instructor spends a lot of time in these chat rooms answering questions for people who then eventually drop it. Because most of the people signing up for the course are not that committed. You've made it seem so convenient, but you've forgotten the root problem, which is that learning, as much as we like to talk about how fun and wonderful it is, learning something difficult is really a very humbling experience. It's a lot of feeling stupid and confused. And if you don't have the commitment going into it, you just give up. So the third type of instructor is the standard kung fu story, where a villager gives up his life on the farm and he treks miles to the teacher's house, and he gets there and he says, I'm going to be your student. And the instructor says, I have no interest in having you as my student. And so the student says, please, 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 please. And the instructor says, well, actually, I have an errand to run. Sit here in the hot sun and while I'm gone, and if you're still here when I get back, we can talk about maybe you becoming my student. And then what he fails to mention is that the errand is going to take him 6 weeks. And he goes out, and the student sits there in front of the hut in the sun and the rain. He eats bugs, children throw stuff at him, and then the teacher comes back, and if the student is still there, then maybe he's willing to take him as a teacher. And this is great, right? Because now he has a committed teacher who's going to see the whole thing through to the end. And this is actually the moral of the story of Empire Strikes Back, right? Luke Skywalker flies in, Yoda says, if you start, you're going to finish it, right? And Luke Skywalker says, yeah. And then halfway through, Luke Skywalker gets in the X-Wing fighter, he flies away, terrible things happen, all right? So the moral of the story is if you're going to start, you should finish the course. So that's the first trick, is choose your students. And this is something that, as someone who makes a living with teaching, it's a little bit tricky, right? We are always tuning our website to make our courses seem a little bit scary so that people come prepared and committed and well-rested and well-caffeinated. And at the same time, we want to make sure that it's not so scary that no one shows up at all. And so walking that balance as a teacher who makes a living doing it, you have to look at how evangelical are you versus how reluctant are you. Once you have a committed student in your class, you still have to acknowledge that learning is difficult. And this is something that a lot of teachers are not willing to do. They come in and they say, this class is going to be fun, and we'll take it very gently step to step, and you'll never feel confused. And it's not true for what I teach. What I teach is very hard, and people are going to be confused a lot. And you really want the student to commit in a humble manner to going through the process. And sometimes their pride gets in the way, and they start to make up excuses about why the training is not working for them. This is what they're experiencing is, this is hard. I've learned some amazing things in my lifetime. What's going on here? I'm going to blame it on the training. And one of the ways that they've done this is they've developed the learning styles myth, which sounds great. It makes total sense. Some people learn visually, some people learn orally, some people learn kinesthetically. However, when we actually do research and test the hypothesis, it doesn't hold up. It has been largely debunked by actual experimental data. There aren't really learning styles. If you're a committed learner and you commit to the process and it's a process that other people have been through, you're gonna get it. And so that's one of my morals about teaching. I'm sorry, I've been stepping through. About teaching and learning is that it's hard, and you should know that going in. You should commit to it, and you should just go through the process. Karate Kid, I was teaching this computer science stuff, and every once in a while I would have a student who just didn't get it. And I'd get very frustrated because I was working so hard based on my experiments and trying to make things better. Why wasn't it working? And I went to my friend Tom the Buddhist, and I said, Tom the Buddhist, I know that they have these monasteries where they teach Buddhist monks to be generous and kind and wise and patient. I said, that sounds like something that's going to fail a lot. How do they do it? How do they teach this incredibly difficult things to these Buddhist monks? And he said, Aaron, he says, the Buddhist monks do not approach it as they have to teach people these qualities. What they do is they create an environment where the people can discover that for themselves. And I was thrilled because this let me off the hook, right? All I was going to do is create an environment where you could show up and you might get it or you might not, but it really wasn't my responsibility. But this actually cuts both ways. And the issue that you face is that if you accept that nothing is ever taught and you're going to be taking money and time from someone, you really have to make sure that the whole environment is optimized to help them through this learning process. And so we really, at Big Nerd Ranch, we work very hard at the whole experience. We pick people up at the airport in a van. We shuttle them out to the woods where there's very bad cell service. We give them an incredible instructor. We give them a place to sleep, a place to eat. The whole experience of the week is just focused on creating this environment where people can learn. And that's what we've been really committed to. And sometimes people don't get it. Sometimes people leave the class and they say, you know what, I did not get everything you said. But if you just submit to the process, you're going to learn as much as you possibly could during that week. And what I was worried about when we started publishing our books, which were based on our courses, is that people would say, hey, you know, I can just buy this $30 book, said all your Barnes & Nobles. I can buy this $30 book instead of attending the $4,000 class. And the demand for our classes would drop off precipitously. And indeed, some people buy the book and they study it on their own. But for people who are really committed to the process, being able to go somewhere where there's no distractions, with a community of people who are going through the same challenges, with a guide who can answer your questions and give you this space to experiment, and those experiments are going to be safe and productive, that's worth it to someone who's really committed to the process. So we didn't see the demand drop off. In fact, the books became a great marketing tool for the courses that we sell, and that's how we sell our courses, is through the books. So nothing is ever taught. In general, when you go to a university course, they tend to teach from general to specific. So let's say you were trying to learn how to make campfires. If you went to a university course on making campfires, the professor would get up and he would say, there are many exothermic chemical reactions in the world that give off heat, and then he would break down the chemicals for you, and then at the very end, he would walk you through building a basic fire. So he would go from abstract to concrete. And this makes sense to him because he's been doing this for so long. He understands the big picture, and he feels like he's giving you this gift. Here's the big picture, and we'll drill down as we need to, but I'm going to give you the big moral. This is not how people learn. People learn when you give them some specific problem and solution, and then you take that, once they have something to hang it on, and you generalize it into a larger idea. And so this is one of just my hint to you as a teacher. Go from specific to general when you're teaching. Another way to help people is make sure that the need for what you're teaching them and what you're teaching them are close together in time. So when you go to the university and you take your campfire course, the professor is going to say, you know, I'm going to teach you how to make a campfire this semester. And then a few years in the future, your job might actually require you to make a fire. And that's why people ask questions like, is this going to be on the quiz? Is because it's so far in the future, they don't feel the immediate need for it. And so as much as possible, we try and bring the need and the teaching close together. And the very best is when you reverse them. And you say, here is a marshmallow and a piece of chocolate and a cracker. We're going to make s'mores, but you're going to need a fire. And then you show them how to make the fire. So they have the need before they actually have the solution. And then once you've taught them about the fire, you then generalize that into all exothermic things. So moving these things close together. If you look at the numbers from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the percentage of jobs that require college degrees is actually going down in the United States. And it's been going down for a good long time. But if you look at the number of careers that require continuing education, apprenticeships, on-the-job learning, a lifetime of learning, the percentage of those are actually going up. And so we're seeing that gradually the demand is headed in this direction, where instead of just doing 4 years of college, and I think college is great, I think everybody should go to college, but you shouldn't accept that that's the end of your learning, is that this is going to be a continuing process. And that's very exciting because it plays into this idea of moving the need for knowledge close to where you learn solutions for those problems. Okay? All right. Teaching requires empathy, and this is really, when they said hidden, I really wanted to do my talk in March, so I desperately twisted it into this. But this is really the idea, is that a good teaching, especially creating the exercises, the materials, the books, the lecture, is about making each step obvious. So you stack ideas so that when you see where you're going as a teacher, you're always preparing the student to hear that message. It's an act of empathy where you're thinking about if I were that person and I didn't know all this stuff and I needed to get to that point, what would I need to hear first so that I would be prepared to hear that punchline? A bad teacher surprises you. They lay out the moral of the story and you're bewildered. Whereas a good teacher leads you up the gentle path, always indicating where you're going. And none of the steps are surprising. So there aren't really big aha moments. If you're a good teacher, each step should be relatively obvious, equally obvious and confusing as you step along. And there shouldn't be huge aha moments. And that's really about empathy. And if I had one thing that I look for when I'm hiring a new teacher, there's two things. I look for curiosity. I always want somebody who thinks that exploring things is interesting. And the other one is empathy, that they can imagine what it was like to be someone else or not to know what they know now. And that's the next slide. It's about curiosity. You really want, as a teacher, to always be fostering your own curiosity, to be peeking in the corners that you didn't explore on your job and see how different things work. But you also want to be fostering that in your students, so that when someone says, will this burn? Your natural response is, I don't know, let's throw it in the fire together. That's part of the joy of being both a student and also being an instructor, is creating that dialogue, that curiosity that leads to experimentation. And it's what's the difference between an online course, really, and having an instructor there in front of you, is the interaction of that curiosity. As I said, a lot of people are very excited about these online courses where thousands and thousands of people can show up. And that's because it really plays in to a good teacher's narcissistic tendencies that eventually they're going to film this lecture. Hello, people out in TV land. They're going to film this lecture, and everybody is just going to watch it, and then they're going to know how to make fires. And my face will be the one person who explains fires to everybody, and I'm going to charge 99 cents each time it happens, and I'm going to get rich on this lecture. It doesn't really work. The role of the teacher being physically with the student is still really important for efficient learning because it creates someone you can ask questions of, and when you're learning something difficult, getting stuck is a very real thing. Someone reading my book will often say, I tried to read your book, and it made sense, and then I got stuck, and 3 weeks passed, so now I'm here for the class. Because an instructor gets you unstuck. An instructor also lets you ask questions, and it promotes the asking of questions. And the final thing that an instructor does that I think is not talked about a lot is the idea that an instructor welcomes you into a community. If I'm teaching you iOS programming, it's not just that I'm giving you this knowledge and we're having this wonderful experience. I'm also introducing you to the questions that iOS programmers ask, the debates that happen inside the iOS community. I'm indoctrinating you as one of us. And that's regardless of what you're teaching. If you're teaching geology, part of the process is you're teaching the students, what do geologists wonder about in the wee hours of the night? Where is this area of study going? It's more than just knowledge. It's becoming a member of that community. So take a minute to imagine the worst job you ever had. The most tedious job. Maybe it paid a lot, maybe it didn't, but it was a tedious job. You hated it. That's the sort of job that should go away. We should mechanize that. We should make sure that the internet got rid of those jobs, that the robots take those jobs. The job of a teacher is something special. It's a great job. It's challenging. Both, I deal with the technology. I also deal with the empathy. It's challenging. It's also a little bit sacred, that idea of bringing people into the community. Being a teacher is a great job. We should not expect teaching to scale because we should expect teachers to be everywhere. It shouldn't be sent out as a video on the internet. So that's really what I want to talk about, the teaching stuff. Let me tell you a little bit about Big Nerd Ranch, because I was going to toil over that a little bit. Big Nerd Ranch is a really nifty company. We work with technology and solve people's problems, so we do a lot of contract app development. We also teach a lot of classes. So our corporate classes, I can't tell you nearly anybody who we teach because they're all under NDA, but Facebook and Spotify have let me stand up here and say, we train the Facebook engineers how to do mobile development. So we've taught about 900 of their engineers, either iOS or Android. We teach at Spotify. If you once again think about a huge tech success story, maybe 2 of those companies, we probably taught both of those as well. We write a lot of apps. We are always hiring, and one of my great things of coming in front of a bunch of creative people is we always need designers. It's sort of a bottleneck for us right now. Brandy, would you mind standing up for just a second? This is Brandy. Brandy is our director of design. If you were thinking about going and getting a new job in design, I wish you'd talk to Brandy. That is the end of my talk. I'm going to open it up for questions now. Questions?
Let's give Aaron a round of
applause.
Oh.
Thank you.
So if you have a question, raise your hand. I'll run the mic out to you so you can ask it so the video hears it. How about you?
How have you changed the way that you're teaching as the demographic of who you're teaching has changed? Because from 1992 to now, the boomers through to Gen X to millennials, how have you changed the way that you teach?
That's a great question. So it's true, we're seeing more and more boomers showing up in the classes. They're retiring from some sort of job. They have a little bit of money, but they still want to be involved in the world, and this is an exciting way to stay involved. They're starting new businesses, and they're a little bit older. And that's the biggest challenge there is about confidence, is that they've been out of the classroom for so long that they're not sure that they can get all these young whippersnapper ideas. And so when I sit down with a boomer and they're unsure, I always tell them this is hard. And it's so important, that part of acknowledging that what you're doing is hard. I used to have a boss, his name was Rock. And Rock had a degree in astrophysics from Caltech. And he was a computer programmer, and I said to him one day, I said, Rock, you have this incredible degree in astrophysics, and you never use any of these astrophysics knowledge that you have. Do you regret getting the degree? And he said, no. He said, Aaron, sometimes I'm doing something, and I'm having a really hard time with it. And I think maybe I'm stupid. And then I think, no, I have a degree in astrophysics from Caltech. And so I say it must just be difficult, and I'll push on through. And that's the sort of thing you have to tell people, is you have learned incredible things in your lifetime. And you are not stupid, and this is hard, and together we're going to get through it. And that's the most sort of challenging demographic. The millennials believe that you can learn everything off YouTube. I'm still grappling with that one. It's okay. Eventually their bosses will pay to have them come to class. Another question? How about the front row here?
So you mentioned just creating an environment that's conducive to learning.
Yeah.
How important is culture in that environment?
So
what do you do to create culture?
Yeah, so we do week-long courses. People come in on Sunday night, and creating that culture as quickly as you can is a really big deal. Everybody gets a name card, so you can see by where the person sits what their name is, and people start to use each other's names. You try to draw out questions. One of the tricky bits, of course, is that in computers, there's a little bit of a macho thing, and so somebody will start asking questions just to show off, and you kind of have to make that person feel awkward and ridiculous, so they stop doing that. But there is ways of promoting that this is going to be fun, and it's going to be hard, and we're all going through it together. And so you create a classroom culture as quickly as you can. We practice. We actually have a teaching club at Big Nerd Ranch. And every other week we get together, and one day we just did openings. And that was what it was all about, was creating a 1 week long culture of learning. We also have an online forum for all our former students, the Nerd Association, and we hope that that culture continues going forward. But it is challenging to set those expectations very quickly. Another question? How about this gentleman?
Hey, Aaron, I always enjoy watching you talk about teaching and how you're passionate about it, but what's your favorite learning moment when you realize something in your code that was like aha or just exciting about when you're learning yourself?
So there's something inherently gratifying about mastery, right? I mean, if we look at surveys that they do with workforces, people are much more excited about mastery and autonomy than they are about pay or benefits or any of that stuff. The people need to make enough money to survive, but what feeds your soul really is that idea of I have some self-determination in my job and that I'm really damn good at it. And that's an ongoing process for anybody, where you feel like you're in over your head, and then you battle to rise above it. And I don't know if there's any specific moment in that battle, but I really enjoy the battle, and it's something that I still get to do every day, and I hope all of you do too. That's a terrible answer, but I'm going to skip on. Another question.
Let's do two more questions.
Two more questions. The young lady.
Hi. As someone who worked in an educational field for a long time in early and middle grades education, I was wondering if you think, right now in the private sector, I feel like a lot of the continuing education is needs-based. do you think that that should go into early and middle grades education instead of casting such a wide net?
Oh man, you're going to get political on me.
A
Let
little.
me see if I get the question. Is how early should we identify who should be a mathematician and who should be repairing cars?
No.
Sorry.
I'm thinking like currently a lot of online classes and teaching that you see right now for older or maybe post-college is like how to use Photoshop or like how to do very specific things.
Yeah.
Whereas I think a lot of people coming out of college right now might not even know how to balance a checkbook. So how do you incorporate needs-based education into lower, kind of earlier education without losing the casting of the wide net? You understand?
Yeah, I understand. So, this is a wonderful question, and one that I debate in the wee hours of the morning. I feel like there's a certain core of knowledge that everyone in a democracy should have. That's part of creating a dialogue about who we are and where we're going. And so I totally understand that certain courses have to be mandatory, and and some of them are not even about what do you need. It's about what does the world look like so that you can be a participant in the world. And I believe with all my heart that that's a very important thing. And at the same time, I recognize that if I were in a classroom being told things that I didn't really need, I wouldn't pay attention. And it would not be a good learning experience for the teacher or the student. And so the question becomes, how do you gradually bring someone from doing something that is just mandatory to something that is more clearly needed in the short term? And I hate to dodge terribly hard, but I think there's always going to be a mix. And I think there has to always be a mix. It's a very hard question. And it's interesting as well, at the moment the whole nation is going through a discussion about the core curriculum and the idea of there is a base knowledge that every citizen of the United States should have. And I'm totally in favor of that. And I'm also totally in favor of being able to say to a kid, you don't have to go to college. If this is where your passion is and you can pursue it right now, go ahead. We have a kid. He was a Georgia Tech student. He came for a summer internship. He got to the end of his summer internship and he said, I don't want to go back to college. He was a sophomore in college. And had spectacular code. Nice guy, fit right in with the team. And everyone was like, why is he going back to college? This is what he's going to college for. So he decided he wanted to take a year off. And he went to the CEO and he said, you have to call my mom. And he did. CBQ got on the phone, he called the guy's parents and explained how it would work and what the trade-offs were of staying in college versus coming and working for us for a year. And once the parents had heard, they decided that was fine for Zach to take the year off and work with us. And we'll see at the end of the year if he decides to go back or not. I think he will. I think he likes the college experience. But it was a great opportunity for him to take a little time, make a little money, and do what he really wanted to do. One more, right, Blake?
One more.
How about this person here? Beige coat. Okay, that's fine.
Beige coat?
Well, both of them. Let's do two. Can we do two?
Quick.
So for your corporate training, how do you, I'm not really sure exactly what the process is for a corporation saying employees go take this course, but how do you make that not feel mandatory for the students?
Oh, one of the cool things about the technologies that we teach is people are really excited to learn them. It looks great on your resume that you have taken a big nerd ranch in iOS programming. Especially when we go to not Silicon Valley, but like Paducah, Kentucky. When we show up, they're just like, oh, you are Prometheus bringing us fire. So it would be harder if it was like hazardous materials handling. I think we would have a hard time not making that feel mandatory. But for what we do, most people are really excited to be in the class. And we're so spoiled that way. I will be the first to admit the teaching experience that we get is better than anybody because people are so excited to learn it. There are people who are told it's mandatory, and you can tell that they don't want to be there. But most of the time, people are really excited to be there, and we're spoiled that way. Yeah, and the gentleman in the black t-shirt, too.
Thanks so much for a great talk. It's been
enjoyable.
My question is, there are great economic advantages for institutions to do distance learning, to do online learning. Do you think we're going to have to wait until distance learning fails in order to get teachers back in classrooms?
So it's funny is that there's a lot of hype about distance learning in the media right now, but it's really nothing new. It's the continuing evolution. So Gutenberg came out with the printing press, and suddenly you could buy books and you could share them with people. Like, that was a huge step forward in terms of distant learning. The expert could be one place and he could ship the book off. And then with the Postal Service dominating the country, we had the rush in correspondence courses. So in the 50s, there was it was the same thing as these online courses. There was a lot of excitement about correspondence courses and how we were all going to become incredible professionals because we were going to do these correspondence courses. And there was a little burst in that, and then it sort of died off. And now we're seeing the same thing with the online distance learning. It's not going to fail. Correspondence courses didn't actually fail. They still exist. You can still do correspondence courses. And they're successful for a certain segment of the population. And I think online training will also be really successful for people who can't get away from their job or their lives. They're taking care of older parents or small children. It's still an opportunity for them to get the knowledge in a convenient way. I think that what's going to happen, though, is that there will always be a space and a need for instructor-led training. I think there will always be a need for teachers. And I think that anyone who's arguing that it's going to go away because of online training is living under the same delusions that the correspondence course people in the 50s believed. All right? Thank you so much. It's been a great pleasure.